It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead. Treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Virtuoso.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
And then if I'm wrong later and we find factual evidence that Sasquatch, aliens, all that exists, I will be so excited. But I don't need to waste my time on stuff that doesn't have any factual basis.
Yes, except when stuff happens like within the past 5 years, the Navy and the military forces of the United States released all of this information and got all this stuff leaked of basically all these instances of different Navy pilots reporting, hey, I saw this thing. And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, we'll write that down. And then never tell anybody, never release it to the public. There's images, or not images, but rather video of military personnel locking onto these super high speed items that they're just like, we don't know what the hell this is. And the government went, okay, yeah, don't tell anybody about that. We're just going to lock that one right away.
Kyle Hill, who is a scientist and just YouTube nerd, who was originally the host for the new Mythbusters.
Okay.
He's an engineer, goes through nuclear science, and was on the show Because Science, where he would try to explain like the physics of how the Hulk would work, or trying to make things in Marvel movies make sense in the real world. He actually goes through the documents that were just recently released. Interesting, but fairly debunkable. A lot of these documents, in these same documents, come up with possible reasons as to why a lot of these happened, whether it be technological issues with certain radar scanners, things like that, that seem quite plausible. I'm not saying...
Or he's a government shill.
Yeah, okay, yes, of course. YouTube basement guy is government shill. By the way, if you guys like this podcast, you will most certainly like Kyle Hill's channel. It's very interesting.
I gotta check it out. I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
And we're about to get going into Franz Liszt Part 2. Hopefully y'all listened to Part 1 and enjoyed it so far. Before we get going, though, just a couple of agenda items to go over. First and foremost, I always like to give a quick little plug if anybody is enjoying this show. We'd really appreciate your support. You can just go to patreon.com/thebiographers. As of now, I can't talk right now. As of now, everything is self-funded. So if you are able to contribute anything to help us keep going with this endeavor, it would be very much appreciated. And then right along with that, we are going to get going, I think probably this week, with a Kickstarter. We'll see how that one goes. But that one does actually have incentives. So we're going to have things like stickers and posters and signed posters and baseball hats and stuff like that. So if anybody is interested in, not just supporting, but actually getting something in return for the support, you can go to kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. You can support us there.
Yes, and the Kickstarter is all or nothing. So if you believe we'll fail, put all your life savings into this. You'll probably get it back.
Our goal is only $10,000. By Kickstarter standards, that's relatively small. By my standards of money, that's a lot of money. So I'm not exactly holding my breath that we're going to achieve it, but hey, we're going to at least start it and see what happens. And if we can get some funding, then sweet.
Yeah, I hope we've added value. And if you feel that way, then maybe consider supporting us.
Yeah, we'd really, really appreciate it. So, without further ado, let's get into Franz Liszt Part 2.
Let's do it.
Now, last time we saw the young musical prodigy Franz Liszt go from his hometown of Rating, which was in Hungary at the time but is now part of Austria, to professionally touring musician, bouncing from place to place throughout Europe to perform concerts. Franz's musical abilities were fostered by his music-loving father, Adam, who relocated the family to Vienna when Franz was a child, initially to receive piano lessons from the renowned composers and pianists Carl Czerny and Antonio Salieri. Now, Franz's musical tour of Europe proved to be incredibly lucrative as concertgoers were overwhelmed by his ability to play the piano, and word soon spread of what many were calling the new Mozart. Where we left off last time, the now 15-year-old Franz was taking a well-earned vacation with his father, Adam. But sadly, the vacation didn't last long, as Adam was feeling ill upon arrival, and on August 28th of 1827, passed away, with typhoid fever being the suspected cause of death. Adam's final words to his son before passing away prophetically warned that without him, Franz might become confused and ruled by various women seeking to leech off of his success. Though Franz did still have his mother, he had lost his most important influence and was feeling somewhat alone in the world.
And to be fair, he was a little leeching off of the success. So, if it happens again, life wouldn't change all that much.
This is true. His dad, we talked about it in the last episode, was definitely loved his son, was supportive of his son, did what he could, but was definitely, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more here. Yeah, he was very much going like, hey, everybody, look at my talented son. Money, please.
Money, please.
Money, please. Now, after his father's death, Franz returned to Paris, where his mother Anna joined him. With his father now gone, Franz was beginning to lose interest in performing or playing concerts, describing the entire affair as, quote, on par with a juggler or the performing dog.
Yeah, that kind of makes... Well, 38 shows a month kind of makes you feel that way about anything.
Initially, that slowed down as he got more popular because he was able to charge more per concert. But yeah, he definitely was working his tail off. Now, he wanted to become what he called a true artist and began to move out of the spotlight. Despite making loads of money as a young touring artist, Franz's father seemed to have been fairly reckless with his spending habits, as Franz admitted that he didn't inherit much money after he passed away.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, so my theories were correct.
Kinda, yeah. Like I said, they were living in, a very luxurious lifestyle as they were touring, but yeah, there was not a lot going into savings, let's say. So Franz kind of had to start over financially.
He's just like on Facebook Marketplace selling like ye old jacuzzis and like, Pelotons. Yeah. Just like whatever his dad has, just like in his apartment.
In many ways, that is true. There was some money, but not nearly as much as you would think.
Yeah.
Now, not being particularly interested in performing at the time, Franz soon began to work as a music teacher, giving private lessons to aristocratic homes, in addition to teaching at an all-girls school, which, as you can imagine, was fairly calculated by the attractive and lonely boy. But he would later write, quote, I taught every day from 8:30 in the morning to 10 at night and barely had time to catch my breath.
Taught so hard. I taught him so hard.
Well, this teaching is keeping me up late at night.
I'm picturing like a young Indiana Jones with the girl with the like, I love you on her eyelids.
Eyelids, yeah. As he's teaching. That's funny.
Because he's about the same age as a lot of these students, too, at this point.
Yeah. He's like 16, 17, kind of in this period.
Hell yeah. First ethical relationship in biographer's history. Let's go.
Now, because Franz got home so late at night, he was known to pass out in the stairwell of his apartment building so as not to wake up his mother, whom he was still living with at the time.
So he's like a bad boy, but still kind of a mensch.
He's sweet. We're going to learn a lot more about him, but always kind of know throughout everything that we're talking about his character, at least for people that hung out with him. It was never like, this guy's a bastard. It was always like, you may have issues with his lifestyle, but he's so sweet. He's like the nicest guy.
That kind of reminds me of me when I was in high school, because I definitely got into trouble. But like when it came to coming back to the house, I was always like, hi, Mom, I love you. You know, that type of thing. Little did she know I was probably doing more worse stuff than my sister was. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's might be a fairly common thing with people like this. But yeah, just know he was never like seen as a bad person. He was always pretty well loved by everybody that knew him.
Just a party animal to some extent.
Yeah. Now, it was during this period that he also began to smoke and drink more heavily and began to grow accustomed to a lack of sleep. This would be the start of a lifelong habit for unhealthy living. It was also around this time that Franz first fell in love.
Aww.
Her name was Caroline de Saint-Cric, who was 17 at the time of their romance. Franz had been giving her piano lessons, and the two soon fell in love. But Caroline's father didn't approve of their relationship, as he saw Franz as part of the lowly middle class and wanted his daughter to marry into what he felt was a class equal to her, which was definitely the upper class.
Yeah, but she loved the pianist, so... I'm sorry, it was right there.
I know.
There's a whole episode and I didn't say anything about it.
I've tried to not include that word throughout this entire series because I knew you were going to give me shit about it.
Okay, that's the last time. Last time. I don't promise.
But Caroline was soon forced to marry a count, and the two were then shuttled off to the south of France, leaving Franz heartbroken and ashamed.
Oh.
This event left a profound mark on Franz as he began to realize the upper class didn't see him as a respectable human, but rather a paid entertainer, and he felt that his pride and honor had been sullied. This event, combined with the recent passing of his father, threw him into a deep depression, and he soon began to attend church every day, praying that he receive some kind of direction on where to go with his life. He also took to reading books on philosophy and religion, desperately looking for meaning in his sorrow. Such was the extent of his reclusiveness and misery that one French newspaper even reported, falsely, that he had committed suicide and even published a full obituary for him. Needless to say, Franz was in bad shape. But thankfully, he was not completely alone as he seemed to imagine, as his good old mama, Anna, was there for him through everything. She took care of him, cheered him up, and encouraged him to get out of the house to break up his melancholy. Before long, Franz started giving concerts again, if nothing more than to support his mother and repay the love she showed him. On this, I can completely relate to Franz. Moms are just the best.
Yeah.
They are. Love you, Mom.
Love you, Ma.
Now, luckily for Franz, there was soon something of a miniature revolution that took place in 1830 that would rejuvenate the atmosphere of artistry and creativity in Paris. Long story short, in 1830, King Charles X of France enacted a series of policies that suppressed voter rights, dissolved parliamentary bodies, and gave even more power of influence to the Catholic Church. As a result, the people rebelled, protested, overtook the government, and by August of 1830, Charles X abdicated the throne and fled in exile to England. Not long before this, Poland also rebelled against their Russian rulers, but the Polish were brutally suppressed by the Russians, and many of its artists, writers, and revolutionaries had fled to Paris. All of this turmoil had now inadvertently created a new colony of artists and thinkers in Paris, where Franz was quickly swept up into the excitement, and he was soon practically living in the salons around Paris. And a salon, by the way, really just means a gathering place, especially during this period. So if anybody's like, a hair place, what is that? No, it's like in Paris, this was like in a house, they would have a salon. And the salon was oftentimes more easily accessible than the rest of the house, so people could just kind of show up. And there'd be like people hanging out, and there'd be drinks, and there'd be a piano, and there'd be instruments, and they would sit there and talk, and they would chat, and they would play music, and they would do all this different type of stuff. So they would be like, hey, we're going to go over to, Franz didn't have one, but we're going to go to Franz's salon. And they would just go and chill. So that's kind of what they were, in case anybody's curious.
Cafe vibes.
Yeah, except in a person's house.
Yeah.
It was kind of what it was. Now, Franz soon found himself in the regular company of people like Heinrich Heine, known for his poetry in collaboration with Karl Marx, Victor Hugo, famed author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables, Friedrich Chopin, one of the most beloved piano composers of all time, and Alexandre Dumas, famed author of The Prince of Thieves, The Count of Monte Cristo, and The Three Musketeers.
I was about to say, whoa, that is so cool.
So these were all homies of his at this point. He's just chilling out with Alexandre Dumas. Like,
that's so
tell
dope.
me about what you're writing.
Chopin, I mean...
And they became really good friends. And they played a lot of concerts together, and we're going to talk about Chopin just a little bit kind of coming up here, but I'll save that for a second. But one person in particular became not only a close friend to Franz for decades to come, but also a profound influence on his musical sensibilities. That was a man named Hector Berlioz. Now, Hector Berlioz was a classical composer and conductor, and the day that he and Franz first met was the day before Berlioz was finishing his latest preparatory rehearsals for his newest piece called Symphonie Fantastique.
Oh.
Fantastic Symphony.
Yeah.
Franz attended the very first performance of Symphonie Fantastique the next day, and it completely changed the way he saw music as a form of art. With Symphonie Fantastique, Hector had created what's described as an autobiographical drama in 5 movements. And no, this was not an opera with actors on the stage, just a symphony playing music. But somehow, Hector Berlioz was able to convey his life story through music.
That's so cool.
In the first movement, Rêveries Passions, which means daydreams, passions, Hector paints the scene of a young artist falling madly in love. In the second movement, Un bal, which obviously means a ball, the young artist finds himself in the chaos of city life, portrayed through a hectic and swanky party, which makes his soul feel conflicted and uneasy. In the third movement, Scene au champ, which means scene in the country, the artist finds comfort from the frantic life in the city by escaping to the country and watching the shepherds tend their flocks. In the fourth movement, Marcher au supplice, which means march to the scaffold, the artist is rejected by his love, which in turn causes him to drink poison, not killing him, but hurling him into a fever dream where he imagines that he commits a murder. And finally, the fifth movement, Son d'une nuit du sabbat, which means dream of a night of the Sabbath. The young artist dramatically perishes, surrounded by witches and ghosts, reflecting the darkened state of his mortal soul.
Ooh. That's very cool. Do they kind of like have a poem between each movement to just be like, so this is it? Or did people just leave and they're like, huh?
So he actually gave pamphlets out.
I see.
So when people were there, he kind of described...
Painted a bit of a picture for them so that they could kind of get in that
so when
vibe.
They're hearing it, they're going,
very cool.
Okay,
That's very
okay,
cool.
I know what you're doing. So he's painting all of these emotions and his kind of life through these movements, these 5 movements of Symphonie Fantastique.
Which, by the way, it's a bit of a pat on the back to like, before you even put it out, be like, oh, this is the best symphony in the world. That's what I named it.
Not the best, but he's calling it fantastic, which I'm like, hey, if it's great, it's great.
I mean, he was right, but it's a bit of a gamble.
For Franz, the Symphonie Fantastique was a revelation. It was a combination of poetry and music that broke through the confines of music, being used to simply describe a feeling or a scene in nature. Franz was awakened to the idea that music was not restricted to what his instructors taught him, but an ever-evolving art form that was open for interpretation and exploration. It was kind of like when the band The Stooges first saw The Who perform in the late 60s and thought, oh, you can actually make music however you want to? There are no rules to this? That's how Franz Liszt felt after hearing Symphonie Fantastique.
That's super cool. Hey, just a little thing about The Who. Apparently, I don't remember this. I kind of remember this. When I was working for my dad's band, me and Julio, we did a house party in like Estes Park or in the mountains, and I played bass in front of the bassist for The Who.
John Entwistle?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool.
Yeah, that's all I know. He just like patted me on the back and he was like, good job. And I was like, not really. And that was it. But
that's still awesome,
That's my claim to fame.
That's super cool. Now, after seeing what Hector Berlioz was able to do with music, Franz was now rejuvenated in his musical inspirations and was starting to give more and more performances, often sharing the stage with his new friend, Friedrich Chopin. Now being in his early 20s, and with his fame increasing once again, his rock star persona was also beginning to blossom more and more. Now, if I haven't made it clear enough already, Franz Liszt was a very good-looking man, and there are actual pictures of him that you can Google. Go check it out. Now, you might not personally agree. Everyone has their own taste, but boy oh boy, the ladies of his day sure think he was gorgeous. And even if you don't think he was very good looking, also remember that he was a true rock star of his day. And if we've learned anything from Mick Jagger,
I was just about to say,
it's that you don't need to be the best looking person ever to woo the ladies.
Jay-Z and Beyonce, you know.
And Franz definitely knew how to woo the ladies. He was young, tall, thin, charismatic, and an absolute stud on the piano. Now that he was getting out of his depression and back to his old self, he was starting to become a regular barfly and purveyor of one-night stands. But not just one-night stands. He also had established a rotating schedule of regulars that he was particularly fond of, which included sugar mamas, baronesses, and royals, all of whom he engaged with regardless of their single, betrothed, or married status.
Damn! Okay.
It was even reported that some were more than 15 years his senior.
Okay. I respect that.
To provide one example, in 1835, Friedrich Chopin left Paris for a few weeks on business. So Franz basically said to him, "Hey, Fred, I know you're going away for a few weeks. Any chance you'd want to do me a favor? You got that nice big apartment in the middle of Paris, and nobody's going to be using it. Any chance I could just, crash there while you're gone?" The sweet and innocent Chopin agreed, not thinking much of it, but later discovered that Franz was using the apartment as a temporary love nest for secret rendezvous with a woman named Marie Pleyel. If that wasn't scandalous enough, as it turned out, Marie Pleyel was not only the wife of Chopin's good friend Camille Pleyel,
Oh no.
but also the former fiancé of Hector Berlioz,
Oh my god.
the man Franz considered to be one of his closest friends.
What a douche. That's so funny. I'm picturing the concierge in Grand Budapest Hotel, how everybody comes over for the weekend and he just bones them and then they're happy and they go on to their socialite lives afterwards.
I mean, that's not far off.
That's
Franz
so funny.
was and it wasn't, look, he was into it, but it wasn't just that he was after everybody. Again, it's sort
Everybody
of
was also after him.
Exactly. They were all dude, this guy, I want a piece of that.
That's exactly what I'm thinking too. It's some old socialites come over to my apartment tomorrow night. And he's like, okay.
Now, years later, when Franz was visiting Vienna, he randomly encountered Marie Pleyel at a cafe, and Marie flirtatiously asked if he remembered their time in Chopin's apartment in Paris, to which Franz replied, quote, "Of course, madame. How could I forget it?"
Ooh. And Chopin's like, what are you guys talking about?
Wait, what about my apartment?
There was a weird smell when I came back. I thought... Too much.
However, despite his rock star lifestyle, Franz was indeed continuing on with his reinvention, and around this time would witness a performance that would change his life. In 1831, he attended a concert given by legendary Italian violinist Niccolò Paganini.
I was so excited about this one.
I knew you knew it, and I was like, I'm going to wait for this one. Now, Paganini's performance was so far above any musician that Franz had ever seen that he described Paganini as having reinvented the art of playing a violin. Up until now, Franz had been more or less relying on techniques taught to him by his former instructors, namely Carl Czerny, who primarily focused on established piano mechanics. But after seeing what Paganini was doing with a violin, Franz became determined to reinvent what it meant to play a piano. For the next 2 weeks after the concert, Franz obsessively played piano, determined to find a new way to express himself through his instrument, and wrote to a friend at the time saying, quote, "My mind and fingers have been working away like two lost souls. I'm spending 4 to 5 hours a day practicing exercises, thirds, sixths, octaves, tremolandos, repeated notes, cadenzas, etc. Provided I don't go mad, you may yet find an artist in me. Yes, an artist such as you desire and such as is needed today.
He's so well spoken too.
So it's so
I mean, it makes sense that he was a ladies' man because, like, I feel like a love letter from him would have been, you know?
Yeah, and dude, I kind of want to try to share some of the letters that he wrote with you, just in case you're curious. It is some of the coolest writing I have ever read. He's writing a letter to a friend, but it feels like it's a poem that he wrote for him. It's just crazy. I can't explain it. It's gorgeous to read.
That's so cool.
Now, in particular, Franz became obsessed with the idea that his middle, ring, and pinky fingers needed to have the exact same abilities as his index finger and thumb. So he would sit for hours and hours every day repeating exercises to strengthen his lesser used fingers. After a while, the exercises became so second nature that eventually he started to get bored. To aid in his boredom but continue building strength in his fingers, he began reading books while practicing, switching the book between hands occasionally while his fingers rapidly practiced on the piano.
That's wild.
Think about that for just a second.
I can't even sing and play at the same time. I've never been able to figure that out. The fact that he's reading while playing with one hand.
A full novel, reading a novel, and he would hold it in his right hand and be practicing with his pinky finger, his ring finger, and his middle finger, just doing octave scales exercise, just practicing away with his left hand.
I can't believe it.
And he would do that, and it was almost like he would go to change a page, switch the page, change it to his left hand, and then now he'd be on to practicing and building strength in his right hand.
That's so wild.
When I read that, I was like, what?
I'd have an aneurysm. There's no way.
How do you even start trying to do something like that? Now, the only modern day comparison I can think to draw is the late guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan, who is known to practice so vigorously and for so long that his fingers would lose blood circulation and turn black. Who I just introduced you to Stevie Ray Vaughan a week or two ago. You didn't know who he was, which I found. I mean, okay, you can't know everybody.
I'm a springful youth.
But man, Stevie Ray Vaughan is one of the all-time greats. I don't know how you didn't know who that was.
When you played Stevie Ray Vaughan, I was like, oh, I can obviously understand this style, the sort of rockabilly sort of vibe.
Blues, not rockabilly.
Blues.
Not rockabilly.
But
whatever.
Definitely that sort of vibe.
Yeah.
Obvious, but I just didn't know who he was.
For sure. Now, the end result of Franz's endeavors was a complete reinvention of how the piano was used as an instrument. His skills on the piano were now so far above and beyond what anyone else was capable of that he started to transform entire orchestra pieces into solo piano performances.
That's so cool.
He took full symphonies written by Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Mozart, and Schubert and reworked them into pieces of music that he could perform alone on a piano. And I'm not talking about him being able to plunk away the melody of certain pieces. He was playing these pieces on the piano with such an intense amount of skill and technique that listeners hardly missed the ensemble orchestra. It's like saying, oh, we don't need to listen to Led Zeppelin perform. There's this new guy that plays the piano, and his version of Stairway to Heaven is so insane that it feels like he's playing for the whole band.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I will also have to say that massive credit needs to go back to the Erard brothers and their advancements in piano technology, as their double escapement invention allowed Franz to do things on the piano that otherwise would not have been possible previously. So a bit of this is definitely right place, right time. Now I'm going to play a short clip of one of Franz's compositions from the time called Grande Etude de Paganini, number 3 in G sharp minor, La Campanella. Translated to English, it means Grand Studies by Paganini, the Bell.
Okay, so this is adapted from Niccolò's work.
No, this is just him basically saying from studying Paganini, he now wrote music with that as a source of inspiration.
I see.
So it's not even a transcript or him trying to, convert from violin to piano. It's just him basically saying, like, when I was studying Paganini, this is what I wrote.
Yeah, it's so cool to imagine them, because my father's a music teacher, and it's so cool to imagine Liszt and Paganini together, because Paganini was also a rock star in his own right.
Oh, we're going to talk about him a little bit in just a few minutes, too. Now, this version is performed by a pianist named Daniil Trifonov, and while Daniil is exceptionally talented, it's important to remember that Franz Liszt was basically Jimi Hendrix on a piano. So anyone who is performing Franz's work after the fact is almost definitely unable to capture the insane magic of Franz performing his own pieces. But regardless, this clip will at least give you an example of the technical wizardry of Franz Liszt.
I have so much to say about that. I have so much to say about that.
Isn't that just insane?
I really was, once again, another one of those situations where, just like Da Vinci, you think stuffy, this is probably very important for its time. But then when you get into it, you're like, no, this is cool now.
Yes.
With him, first thing that I think, as somebody who is a musician, not a piano player, but a musician, I'm trying to imagine where his hands are on the piano. And there gets to be a certain point where there's almost just a suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
Where at first I'm like, okay, one hand's here, one hand's here. And then I'm like, this almost sounds like there are three hands on the piano now. And then it gets to such a mind-boggling, like phantasmagorical, psychedelic thing where you're like, okay, there has to be four pianos on stage.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of Da Vinci's studies of water and how those can like convey emotion. First you have like that trickling stream, and then he's kind of learns how to do swirls and eddies. And then when he gets to his life, it's just a total deluge where you look at these drawings and it's just so chaotic and turbulent. That's how I would describe this. It sounds like turbulence at the end,
Yes.
but in a good way. In the same way that Da Vinci's turbulence was definitely turbulence in a good way. Very, very interesting. Like I said, suspension of disbelief. At some point, you just have to close your eyes and say, I'm not going to be able to figure out how he plays this.
And for everybody who's listening right now, I played Akiva, the full piece. It's about 5 minutes long, maybe 4.5 minutes, something like that. I would encourage everybody out there to go check it out. It's most simply known as La Campanella by Franz Liszt. There are many people that have covered it over the years. The one that I just played again was by an artist named Daniil Trifonov. I can only play you like 30 seconds of it unless somebody, decides to sue me for copyright infringement. So I don't want to do that. So again, I played the entire clip for Akiva, and it is one of those pieces that you have to let it build. Exactly.
The build. It like I said, it very much reminded me of Leonardo's water studies, where it becomes this trickle, and then as he grows and he begins to understand more, and as Franz Liszt begins to understand more of the techniques that he's kind of inspired with Paganini, he begins to build more turbulence and more emotion. And at some point, he just gains an understanding that we don't have, that he does. And you just have to sit back and say, okay, I'm not going to figure this out, but I love it.
Yes. If you ask most classical pianists, they will tell you that Franz Liszt's work is some of the most difficult that you can get into. There's even a point way later in our story that we won't cover in this episode, but there's a very, very famous composer and piano player who, when Franz says, hey, I'd like you to perform this piece that I've written, it's like basically a set of 5 pieces or whatever, a symphony, but it's on a piano. He says, okay, but I'm going to need about 2 years to figure this out and really get to the point where I would feel comfortable playing it to the public, because it was that complicated. And this one that I just played, La Campanella, a lot of piano players will say that it is among the most difficult to actually play of Franz Liszt's work.
I can totally understand. Like I said, it really is turbulence sonically in the best of ways.
Oh, but it works, right?
It's just a total brain blast.
It gives me goosebumps when we were listening to it. I was like, oh man, it's just so like, oh, how it's crazy to listen to him play. And you actually made a comment when we were listening to it, as you said, it kind of reminds me of klezmer music, which, if anybody's not familiar, is, for lack of a better term, it's music of the Jewish people, right?
Yeah, Ashkenazi Jewish people, like in homes and taverns with limited instruments, would kind of come up with like a polka-ish sort of proto-jazz that was very popular amongst Jewish people.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because if you listen to the whole piece, you might just get the feeling that it was inspired by gypsy music.
Yeah.
And it was. Franz intended it to reflect the rhythm and dance of the gypsies that he used to love watching and listening to as a child. So a lot of it was, again, I would encourage everybody to go listen to the piece and kind of almost have in your head an image of a band of traveling gypsies playing music and dancing together. That was what he was meaning for it to reflect as you were listening to it. So a lot of like slow and then start and then da-da-da-da-da-da, and like how it all goes together, and then it gets really complicated and really frantic and really, I don't know. It's just, I love it. I thought it was amazing.
It's incredible. It was, I highly recommend. The 30-second clip is definitely going to be good, but listen to the full 5 minutes. It's
worth it. It's worth
totally
your time.
Worth it.
Now, I'll also say really quickly, if there are any classical music uber nerds out there, I'll say, I know La Campanella wasn't officially published until 1851, but it was a revision of a piece that Franz wrote in 1838, which is only a few years from this point in our story, and I couldn't really find a better place to play this in this whole writing, so give me a break.
It's the same thing with Da Vinci. We didn't know when to talk about the Mona Lisa, but he was working on it for 18 years.
Exactly.
You know?
So this just felt like the right place where it's like, hey, if we're talking about how he reinvented his way of playing piano, this was a pretty good reflection of that, so I wanted to play it now. Now, another important lesson that Franz learned from Paganini was stage presence. Now, sadly, Paganini was diagnosed with syphilis when he was fairly young, which led to a fairly severe facial deformity, like sunken eyes, a rotting jaw, and a fairly toothless mouth. Additionally, Paganini was known to dress head to toe in black, both on and off stage. All of this led to Paganini gaining the nickname of the Devil's Violinist, which lended itself to a dramatically ominous vibe when he performed on stage. Now, Franz noticed that Paganini was leaning into the whole thing and figured he would do the same, but on the opposite side of the spectrum. He began presenting himself as an aristocrat of the piano, boisterously greeting the audience when he took the stage and interacting with the crowd as if they were all friends. When famed author Hans Christian Andersen saw Franz perform, he wrote of the occasion, quote, "When Liszt entered the saloon, it was as if an electric shock passed through it. Most of the ladies rose, and it was as if a ray of sunshine passed over every face, as if all eyes received a dear, beloved friend. When Liszt had ceased playing, flowers showered around him. Beautiful young girls and old ladies who had once been young and beautiful cast each their bouquet."
So basically just like boy band. This is the NSYNC of this time. Just
honestly.
The hype, the parasocial relationship, the like, I know this guy, like, I don't know.
Yes,
very cool.
Absolutely. Now, you might know Hans Christian Andersen, by the way, as he was also responsible for such classics as The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, The Princess and the Pea, and Thumbelina, among many other classic fairy tales.
Yeah.
So he was alive around this time and actually got to see Franz Liszt perform.
That's so cool.
Really neat. Now, as I have mentioned before, Franz's ability to tickle the ivories, his charismatic showmanship, and his devilish good looks made him quite the popular fellow with the ladies. In short, Franz Liszt was dripping with sex appeal. This was also something he used while on stage. One of his signature trademarks was his shoulder-length black hair that would dramatically fall across his face as he energetically performed, which caused him to quickly, yet precisely, swipe his hair back behind his ear. Think Kurt Cobain playing a guitar solo and then swiping his hair away from his face. It was sexy, and Franz knew it.
Yeah, I just imagined like in a slow-mo, like, you know?
And then just swiping his hair back, like, because he's like vigorously playing and his hair would shake and like fall across his eyes, and so he'd just move his hair back behind his ear. Girls just loved
like
it.
Kind of a bad boy thing. I feel like Shalena would have totally loved Franz Liszt at this time. Shalena's whole type is just like bad boys, you know? I feel like
Why's
that's
she with you?
Because I was a dirtbag in high school, to be fair.
At the end of one concert, Franz took his handkerchief from his pocket and tossed it into the audience, kind of like a modern-day musician flicking their guitar pick into the crowd. Composer Heinrich Heine recalled this event and wrote, quote, "Two Hungarian countesses seeking to snatch the handkerchief pulled each other to the ground and fought until they drew blood." Yeah.
That's so funny.
And remember, this was like 1831. So it wasn't a bunch of like Mod Squad groupies like we see today. These were well-to-do women, formally dressed to the nines in big poofy wigs, out at a fancy schmancy orchestra hall in high society.
I bite my thumb at you.
That was like that was basically what was happening. But they're fighting each other for a handkerchief from this guy.
That's so funny.
That's what he brought out of people. Like a true rock star, Franz wasn't just soaking up the attention and affection on stage, he was also enjoying attention and affection off stage. By early 1831, when Franz was just 19 years old, he was having liaisons with all manner of women who were throwing themselves at him, many of who even wanted to marry him. To keep them all from getting too serious about him, Franz would tell them that he couldn't marry, as he was devoting his life to music and to his mother.
Yeah. My love is the sea. Very sailor.
True. Though his sexual conquests were prolific, Franz was never without a heart or sense of conscience, and wrote in 1833, quote, "It's now more than 4 months since I've slept or found peace of mind. The shame and remorse of the evening before and the morning afterwards. From these encounters I've felt, seen, scorned, cursed, and wept." So he feels.
Yeah.
He's not just like, screw him. He's like...
I just imagine him like writing in his diary. He's like, I feel so bad. Meanwhile, like secretly under the covers, a bunch of women are like skirting away under the mattresses. He's like, this is terrible. Yes, eggs would be great.
I mean, you know what he's talking about.
The conflict, the internal conflict.
The inner conflict. Now, Franz enjoyed the fruits of his temptations, but it came with a price, and he found himself growing depressed by his exploits. His mother, Anna, did warn him that these conquests weren't good for him, and his father had also warned him before he passed away. But this would continue to be a hard lesson learned for Franz. However, in 1833, Franz would meet a woman that would cause him to at least briefly give up his adulterous ways, steal his heart, and profoundly impact his life. The Countess Marie de Galt. Marie de Galt, originally born Marie Catherine Sophie, was born to a wealthy banking family in Frankfurt, Germany, and was 6 years older than Franz. After her father passed away when she was young, she was sent off to Paris to be more or less raised in a Catholic convent, though not much of that Catholicism would stick. Marie was said to be beautiful, and while coming of age in Paris, was seen as a hot ticket catch for aristocratic bachelors. Marie was also set to receive more than 1 million French francs upon getting married, which was not lost on suitors vying for her affections.
That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, right, sugar mama. But Marie was clever and definitely used this information to her advantage. Eventually, in 1827, Marie would marry a former French cavalry captain 15 years her senior, named Charles de Galt, who had previously served under the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, sadly, the marriage was completely loveless on Marie's part, but Charles seemed to have treated her well enough, and together they would have 2 children, both girls, Louise and Claire. But after 6 years of marriage, in early January of 1833, Marie attended a swanky party hosted by a woman named Madame Lavaillère. Going into the party, Marie figured it would just be another night of eating, drinking, and chatting, but soon discovered that this party would alter the course of her life. Marie would later write of the night, quote, "Madame Lavaillère was still speaking when the door creaked open, and a strange apparition presented itself to my eyes. I say apparition because I can think of no other word to describe the extraordinary sensation caused by the most extraordinary person I have ever seen." That apparition she was talking about was, of course, Franz Liszt.
I imagine like a ray of light behind him, and then like it slowly reveals his face in like a close pan. And
White
then, like,
doves.
Yep. And then like her hair's like blowing in the wind while there's like a rock solo, like rock ballad playing.
It's like have you ever seen Risky Business with Tom Cruise? It don't work. Some people think it's a classic. I personally think it's a piece of crap. But there's a point where he loses his virginity to a hooker. And she like enters the back room of his bedroom. Like the doors fly open exactly like you are describing.
Yeah.
Ray of sunshine, even though it's nighttime, goes through and she's like in this sexy outfit. It's ridiculous. But that's more or less what was going on.
Yeah.
Now, It didn't take long. Within a few weeks, Marie and Franz engaged in a secret romance, sneakily meeting up wherever they could to find some place to roll in the hay. Amazingly, however, Franz and Marie began to find that they connected on a much deeper level than that of a physical nature. They played piano duets together, read the same books together, and would even write letters to one another, discussing their thoughts and feelings regarding those books. All of this was done in absolute secrecy, even going to the extent of writing their letters in English or German so as to throw off anyone who might intercept them. But Marie was starting to fall in love with Franz and wanted to support him in any way she could. When Franz was invited to play an organ performance at the world-famous Notre Dame Cathedral, Marie was so keen to attend that she went as far as disguising herself as a man just to attend the performance.
Wow.
There is even some speculation that after the performance in Notre Dame was over, the two snuck up into one of the bell towers for a bit of afternoon delight.
Ooh.
And I just have to say that is one of the most rock star things I have ever heard.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Sneaking up into Notre Dame? Oh my gosh, come on. That is so radical.
Oh, yeah.
Which I will never be able to see Notre Dame the same way, by the way. All I'll see is the bell towers, and I'll think of him and Marie
he
doing
boned
it.
there.
Yeah. But rumor soon began to spread of their affair, so they had to be doubly cautious when meeting up. They couldn't meet at Marie's chateau, as her servant staff were known to be rotten gossips, and they couldn't meet at Franz's house because he was still living with his mom. So, to keep things going, but out of the public eye, in the winter of 1833, Franz began renting an apartment in Paris specifically for the purposes of sleeping with Marie, which he aptly nicknamed the Rabbit Hole.
Oh my God.
That's so
terrible.
On the nose. Now, to keep the profile low, Marie would still arrive at the apartment dressed in men's clothing, which she had taken from her own husband's closet.
That's so messed up.
Isn't that, like, brutal?
Rips the mustache off.
Yeah, like, steals her husband's
take me.
clothes so that she can sneak in with her lover. Like, that's just, that's
he's
too
just
much.
like out there playing tennis. She's like, oh, I wonder where my wife is. Huh?
Where's my favorite pants and coat? Now, as their romance continued, it became more and more of a relationship. Marie began to develop deep, jealous feelings and often hounded Franz about what he was doing when she wasn't around. Once, Marie found a stack of letters from one of Franz's previous lovers and became convinced he was cheating on her, to which Franz exhaustedly replied, quote, "It's 4 o'clock. I've only time to say 3 times to you, ridiculous, ridiculous, and once again, ridiculous."
It's also like, girl, you're cheating on your husband right now.
Oh my
Double
gosh.
standard much?
We're going to talk more about that as the episodes
Like,
go
why
on.
would this man, who is totally willing to bone a married woman, how would he dare?
How dare he cheat on me?
Yeah.
It's like, dude, calling the kettle black there.
Look in the mirror, take off the mustache.
Totally.
See what you're doing, homegirl. Like,
Now, Marie continued to be a bit of a jealous nag, probably for good reason, and by October of 1834, Franz was thinking about ending things, as he had recently become enthralled by a woman named Amantine Lucille Aurore Dupin de Franciel,
is that just one lady, or?
more commonly known as George Sand, the critically acclaimed novelist who wrote under a male pseudonym. Have you never heard of George Sand?
No.
Oh, in the world of literature, George Sand is a big name.
Really?
Big famous
okay.
name. And it was not a he, it was a she. And I didn't write it all down here, but really quickly, she's a fascinating character. And remember, this was in the 1830s. She was a firm believer in free love. So she was like, whoever, whenever, I'm gonna do it.
Wow.
The book that I read didn't make any claims, but I would be very surprised if she and Franz were not hooking up. Like, it's just one of those situations where he was all about it, she was all about it, they were attracted to each other, they talked all the time, they hung out all the time.
Yeah.
There are loads of letters that they wrote back and forth to each other. Undoubtedly, they had an affair together. Additionally, she was kind of a badass of her day in that she was known to wear, like, pants. which you could
That is a
not
major
do.
statement. That is.
It really was. And we're talking about like in the 1920s and 30s when Katharine Hepburn was wearing pants, people were like, oh, she wears pants. This was 100 years prior George Sand was doing it.
That's cool. That's
So,
really cool.
She was pretty cool. She was also known to like smoke cigars everywhere she went, just unabashedly, just like smoking away on a stogie.
Yeah, there's no way that they didn't get after it.
Come on. Like it's, I can't like speculate too hard, but I'm 99% sure they were doing the dirty. But in December of 1834, tragedy struck. Marie's eldest daughter, Louise, became gravely ill and passed away on December 10th of 1834. Now, I normally wouldn't include this, but I just have to read this bit of letter that Marie wrote to Franz of her daughter's passing, as it just broke my heart. It reads, quote, "My God, it was appalling. She had sat up in bed. Her eyes were open and were staring wildly. I rushed over to her. She threw her arms around my neck with a gesture of terror, as if trying to escape from an unseen hand. I pressed her to me. She uttered a scream, and I felt the dead weight of her weakened body on my breast." Isn't that like the saddest?
That's so.
It's brutal, dude. Like holding her little kid. Ugh.
Gosh.
Now, throughout her daughter's illness, she constantly thought about Franz and eventually wrote to tell him so. Over the next few months, they squabbled a few times, but eventually reconciled. And in March of 1835, much to both of their surprise, Marie discovered that she was pregnant. And it was undoubtedly Franz's child, as she had not been with her husband for months. Amazingly, though, Marie's husband, Charles, accepted her divorce proposal without any opposition, and for the rest of his life was never known to speak poorly of Marie.
Wow.
He was like, okay.
He got like $1 million francs out of the situation, so he's like, okay,
Yeah, and he was, again, we're going to talk a lot, not a lot more, but we're going to be talking more about Marie de Gault as the series goes on. I'll say up front, I don't really like her as a human, and I'll get into the reasons why, but it's kind of amazing that even though from all the stuff that I've read, I'm like, man, I really don't like this person. Her first husband was like, but you won't hear that from me.
That's honestly.
He was like a class act about the entire thing.
Mad respectful.
It was very cool.
Yeah.
Now, in order to avoid copious amounts of social backlash aimed at them in Paris, Marie and Franz decided to leave for Switzerland. Franz used their trip to create a musical diary known as Album d'un Voyageur, which means album of a traveler, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that French pronunciation, where each piece of music reflected a place they had visited and is widely considered to be one of Franz's greatest works. They eventually settled in Geneva, imagining it to be a low-key place to have their baby, but their incognito status was short-lived, as Franz Liszt was just too famous at this point to go unnoticed. Franz was soon receiving invitations to perform and even teach at the newly formed Basel Conservatory. This was no good for Marie, who seemingly wanted Franz all to herself. She didn't even want him performing anymore, as she was jealous of all the women who would swoon over him. But Franz was always an extrovert who got energy from being surrounded by people and just couldn't keep himself away from public life.
Well, that's kind of hard because you fall in love with Franz for his nature of being the concert pianist, for his nature of being extroverted. And then as things get more complicated, you're kind of asking somebody who's not that person to become a very different individual.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, do you really still want Franz, or do you want a different version of Franz that kind of better suits your lifestyle now?
That is completely accurate. Yes. I think Marie de Gault was that type of person that was like that Barbra Streisand movie. You don't love me, you love the idea of me. It's like,
yeah,
that's kind of what it was in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, she did love Franz, but yeah, you're totally right.
For sure. Franz could have become monogamous and all that, but I wonder how much of him being a performer, how much of him being adored was just intrinsically him.
And also a part of what she loved. She was like, oh, everybody loves him, but he's all mine. And now I don't want anybody else to be around him because he's all mine, and I'm worried that he's going to be going for other people. It's like, you know what you got into, lady.
It's also the foundation in which your relationship was based off of was cheating and secret rendezvous, and now all of a sudden you're expecting a straight edge guy, which is just not what he is.
100% correct. And I'm not necessarily condoning the behavior, but
not at all.
It was who Franz Liszt was.
It's what she was too.
Yes, exactly.
But, just because you adapt doesn't mean that your partner's going to. And sometimes the very reasons that you fall in love with someone could be the exact reasons why you fall out of love with them later on.
Yes, absolutely. Now, their first child was born in Geneva on December 18th of 1835, and they named her Blandine Rachel. Marie's identity on the birth certificate was labeled only with initials, as law at the time stated that a married woman could only have one father to her children, which would default to her husband. And remember, she was not legally divorced.
I see.
So, if Marie put her actual name down, their daughter would legally be the child of her husband, Charles de Gaulle.
Gotcha.
Isn't that weird?
That is so weird and very misogynistic and very...
Totally.
Yeah.
Now, this then meant that Blandine legally had no mother. And years later, this fact would be the source of great importance. But we'll get there later in our series. Regardless of the drama surrounding his daughter's birth, Franz, who is now 24, was elated to be a father. About a year after his daughter's birth, Franz and Marie moved back to Paris as the gossip of their scandalous affair had finally calmed down. And Franz was able to make a better living there. By 1837, Marie was again pregnant, so the two decided to take an extended trip through Italy. They spent time in Milan, Bellagio, and Blevio, but as Marie's due date drew closer, they decided to settle for a time in Lake Como, which is George Clooney's future home.
Really?
Yeah, that's like famously he's lived in Lake Como for a long time. Now, on December 24th of 1837, Marie gave birth to their second daughter. Though Franz didn't know it at the time, his new offspring would grow to become one of his greatest sources of headaches and frustration, in addition to becoming one of the early figureheads of the anti-Semitic movement that led to Nazism in Germany and across Europe.
That was a total left field. I thought you were going to be like, and she's going to become a great pianist. It's like...
She was born as Francesca Gaetana Cosima Liszt, but history would come to know her as Cosima Wagner. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 3 of Franz Liszt.
Great. That was such a good one, man.
And if anybody caught that last name, we'll get more into that later on. But yes.
That was a total left hook. I really thought you were going to say like she's incredible with the violin, or was going to be like a radical feminist and you didn't like it or something like that. But it's like, no.
Nope.
Just going to be a Nazi.
We will be learning more about Cosima in more episode 4. Episode
Cosima,
3.
Isn't that an Italian name?
I don't know.
Because it's like Cosimo Medici.
I don't know.
know.
Not really sure. But yeah, we're going to learn more about her in episode 4, because this next episode that we're going to get into in part 3, she's just a baby, right? So there's not a whole lot that we can talk about, and it's just sort of covering the next parts of Franz's life. But once we get into episode 4, she gets into like her teen years and then into her 20s and stuff, and we're going to learn kind of what she started to become, and then who her... I don't want to give away too many details, but sort of how her love life would unfold, let's say very vaguely.
I see.
And if anybody recognized her last name that I just caught, which was Wagner, we'll talk more about it as we go on. But especially people who are Jewish go, oh, I know about Wagner.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll not spoil anything.
Yeah, we won't want to spoil anything. But there we go, man. Episode 2, done and done, on the books.
Boom. That was great. I loved listening to that piece. That totally set an incredible tone. I also would highly recommend people listen to Paganini's stuff as well, because you'll totally understand where like that inspiration comes from. I myself really enjoyed listening to Paganini when I was really into music when I was younger. So cool. Just so cool.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I would say anybody that is even remotely interested in this stuff, I know classical music has this kind of reputation where it's like, oh yeah, your great grandfather was really into it, but nobody these days listens to classical.
It's like weirdos and math teachers.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to try to get an open mind and try to expose themselves a little bit more to this classical music stuff. And I think Franz Liszt in many ways is a really great place to start. We're going to talk about it more in future episodes, but in many ways, Franz Liszt ended up kind of paving the way for what we now know music to be. And I'll kind of leave it at that for now. But very particularly, I would, again, like Akiva said a second ago, highly encourage y'all to go and listen to the full piece of La Campanella. It's just a gorgeous piece, and it's also technically unbelievable without making it feel inaccessible.
Yes.
If that makes sense. It's
100%.
like a lot of times people like don't like jazz because they're like, oh gosh, just calm down.
Too experimental.
It's too much. There's too many notes you're playing. And this is one of those weird and I think sort of rare occasions where there are too many notes, but in the best way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It's like it all makes sense, the amount of notes that are being played. So anyhow, start there with Franz Liszt. And if it intrigues you, go and check out more of his work, because even classical pianists that are alive today say that he is one of their favorites. They just really loved his sensibility, his style, It's
a musician's musician.
Yeah, absolutely. So go check him out. He's really, really good. And hopefully you're enjoying his insane life so far.
Yeah.
And it's going to get even crazier. I can't even explain how yet, but trust me, it is going to get crazier and crazier. And
so many name drops too.
Yeah. I told you at the end of the last episode, I was like, we're going to get into some name drops where he was hanging out with like Victor Hugo, and he's hanging out with Friedrich Chopin, was one of his best friends. Hans Christian Andersen. Yeah, there was a lot of very, very cool people that he was hanging out with regularly that were pals of his, kind of a thing. So, all right, well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Lastly, I'll just kind of say, like I said at the beginning of the episode, if y'all are enjoying this so far, humbly ask for your support. It's just going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. And we're also starting up that Kickstarter. If you wanted to help us out there, that is just kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. And I'm thinking we'll probably launch it this week just because why not?
Yeah, let's do it. Also, big thanks to the people who are already subscribed to our Patreon.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't tell you how much we appreciate this.
And how much it means to, I mean, look, all monetary anything aside, it's one of those things of just, I started doing this and brought Akiva on as really just I'm interested in this kind of stuff. I feel like there's a void in the podcast space. There's a lot of people that are like, hey, let's tell you about Jeffrey Dahmer and all the terrible things he did. And I kind of got to this point where I went, can you do the same thing, but tell me about interesting people?
Yeah.
That actually contributed to society in a positive way, and that I can actually I can talk to other people about. I learn this stuff and go, dude, this person's so crazy. Oh, here's what they did.
And find how they permeate into our cultural canon.
And we absolutely will get there more with Franz Liszt too. It's unbelievable. I didn't know how much he really was this, not just the first kind of rock star, pop star. What he actually contributed to pop music as we know it today is also amazing. So anyhow, hopefully y'all are enjoying this whole idea, but that's kind of where this whole thing started. So just knowing that other people out there are interested enough that they go, hey, here's a couple bucks because I want the same thing.
It's one thing to listen, but it's another thing to actually say, here, I find value in this, so let me give you value. It means a lot.
It really, really does. It's sort of like, it's almost, not even almost, it makes me emotional personally.
It's an affirmation, yeah.
Yeah, so I really appreciate all y'all's support. Lastly, I'll say, go and check out Akiva's website. Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA. That's going to be all for all your metalworking, but specifically knife making and really specifically chef's knife needs. Go check out his work. Yeah. It's absolutely gorgeous. How long have you been doing it for now?
Man, I just recently hit the 11-year mark from like the first time that I ever really did any blades. It was 12-year mark for the first time that I ever did any bladesmithing professionally, meaning full-time or as close to full-time as one can swing in this sort of career. Been doing it for about 3 years now.
There you go.
And now I'm an instructor at Hardy & Fuller. I would also highly recommend, if you're in the Denver area, please sign up for a class with Hardy & Fuller. Or message me if you want to take, one-on-one classes, that type of thing. We're opening an open studio. So if you're in Denver, do that. If you're in Northern Colorado, hit me up at my shop. I'm available for teaching as well as commissions. And as far as commissions go, chef knives are obviously my specialty. But this next week, I'll be working on a 30-inch Chinese-inspired cutting sword, which will be used by a fencer at the fencing academy that I used to go to.
Very cool. I didn't know that. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So
well, right on. Yeah, go check out his website. Again, that's Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com. And if you do order anything, use the code biographers at checkout. You get 10% off your order. And most importantly, you support Akiva. So
yes, which will help me pay for gas to get to Daniel's house to record.
Well, I think that's going to do it, everybody. Once again, thanks for listening. And like I always say, remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.